Guys, definitely kick your shoes off on the way in. This is Mr. Biscuit Speaks. Welcome to the channel. Definitely like and subscribe if you like the content. We're taking a look at Thomas Sowell, someone who is a repetitive source of insights, probably I'd say one of the premier intellectuals in America as far as, economics goes. Let's see what he has to say, guys. This is about black culture keeps blacks down. It's not blacks keeping blacks down necessarily. It's the culture. So I wonder what he means by this. Tell me if you guys agree. Let's see.
Well, was not the culture in which black kids grew up in America today.
So they
There's
had
no gangster rap that was pervasively available in Germany.
Let's read that. It says, "It's not being black. It's a way of life. Unfortunately, the way of life is being celebrated not only in rap music, but among the intelligentsia. Is a way of life that leads to a lot of very big problems for most people." Thomas Sowell. So it's not only in rap music, but among the intelligentsia. It's a way of life that leads to a lot of very big problems for most people. So he wrote a book called Black Rednecks and White Liberals that I recommend everybody take a look at. It's extremely interesting. It's a very long book, but he kind of talks about the history of, the black culture and how black culture was essentially borrowed from Southern redneck culture. And that, nine out of 10 black people, I think he said some number like that, are still, contemporarily impacted by white redneck culture in the black culture. It's kind of trippy. So let's see where this takes us.
I mean, the average of black kid today, I think, is probably better off, certainly materially, than, say, Ben Carson was when he was growing up.
Ben Carson, the famous
Black
surgeon at
neurosurgeon.
Johns Hopkins.
Right, right.
Who is immensely accomplished in every way.
Yes.
Right.
I would say that certainly the black kids who are growing up today have a higher material standard of living than I had. The difference was that the schools were good when I came along. They were especially good in New York at that time, hard as that is to believe.
I'd love to hear Thomas Sowell's opinion on what happened to the education system, guys. I mean, I don't doubt that he thinks that it has a lot to do with liberal policies, but I'd like to kind of get into the meat and potatoes of what he has to say on that topic.
But the kids who grew up in that same place where I lived, they will not get that same education. Now that can be blamed on somebody, but it has very little to do with what happened 100 or 200 years ago. And it's true in other countries. I mean, in Nigeria, for example,
See, this is something that I hope that he addresses, and maybe he's going to address it now, so let me just stop.
the tribe, the Igbos, who are living in one of the least fertile parts of Nigeria, who were in fact enslaved in centuries past by other tribes and so on. When the British moved in and set up schools, the Igbos went for the schools. By the time Nigeria became independent, the Igbos had climbed above the other groups that had been ahead of them to begin with. But there are all kinds of cross currents of factors.
So when he talks about the Igbos, is he suggesting that there was kind of like almost a chattel slavery or a forced indenture situation amongst the Igbos that was overcome as a result of the British introducing schools? I want to rewind that part. See what
Who
he
were
said.
in fact enslaved years ago.
Oh, he says slavery. Let's
And
see.
it's true in other countries. I mean, in Nigeria, for example, there's a tribe, the Igbos, who are living in one of the least fertile parts of Nigeria, who were in fact enslaved in centuries past by other tribes and so on. When the British moved in and set up schools, the Igbos went for the schools. By the time Nigeria became independent, the Igbos had climbed above the other groups that had been ahead of them to begin with. But there are all kinds of cross currents of factors. The particular culture, or the particular geography, you run through the whole list of them.
This is the reason it would be very difficult to debate somebody like Thomas Sowell, is because as soon as you try to say, look, the reason that the black culture is in a situation that it's in, I think, who was it? I forget the guy who, the Harvest Institute, his name is escaping me right now, but he gives the statistic that black people represent 12 to 13% of the country and only represent 1 to 2% of the wealth within the country, and that disparity is the result of slavery, things like that. It's difficult to use that line on someone like Thomas Sowell because he's just going to bring up that stat. He's going to bring up the Igbos. He's going to say, well, if that's true, that that this period of slavery has resulted in this, and it's kind of this reoccurring thing, then why didn't the Igbos have that same thing occur to them? Why are they not in the same position? It's interesting. I kind of want to see.
You cite in Intellectuals and Race, you cite an observation.
Guys, Thomas Sowell has written more books than are in most pages of books. Thomas Sowell is he's one of those.
By the intelligence expert, IQ scientist James Flynn, that just stopped me cold. After the Second World War, you've got large numbers of American troops remaining in Germany. For that matter, there's still several tens of thousands there today. And both black and white American soldiers had children with German women. And Flynn discovered that those children growing up in Germany showed no IQ differences at all. The black kids and the white kids, the same. Quoting Intellectuals and Race, Professor Flynn concluded that the reason was that the offspring of black soldiers in Germany, and now you're quoting Professor Flynn, grew up in a nation with no black subculture.
This is insanely difficult to read. Doesn't that just make something sit in your gut like, damn? If this is correct, which I, at this point, guys, have no reason to deny, especially, in the face of a scholar the likes of Thomas Sowell, Professor Flynn concluded that the reason was that the offspring of black soldiers in Germany grew up in a nation with no black subculture. So it has absolutely nothing to do with race. He's saying it's the culture. I hope he gets down to the meat and potatoes as where this culture came from.
Yeah. Close quote. Which means what?
There's also a guy, a contemporary, I don't know if I want to say contemporary of Thomas Sowell, a guy named Larry Elder. He completely flattened the Breakfast Club in his interview over there, and he looks up to Thomas Sowell as well. I think, Ben Shapiro said Thomas Sowell is, maybe the smartest man in America. I mean, this guy's up there, at least on the conservative side. But the thing is, listen, I haven't heard a lot of liberals saying that Thomas Sowell is a crackpot either. You know what I'm saying? This guy's a true intellectual, if we've ever seen one.
Which means they experienced exactly the same expectations. Is this
No. The expectations are external. The culture in which they grew up was not the culture in which black kids grew up in America today.
So there's
no gangster rap that was pervasively available in Germany.
So here's what I'm getting. There is something about black subculture.
See, now, if I were to have the gumption, which I absolutely don't, if I were to have the gumption to try to call Thomas Sowell out for a debate, I would say, look, Germany doesn't have the same history as America does as it pertains to, African Americans and enslavement, after enslavement, Jim Crow segregation, and then blacks moving into sanctuary cities like in inner city Chicago, Yonkers, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Harlem, inner city Detroit, Oakland. Right. Redlining, all of the rest of that stuff. And gangsta rap came out of the desire to actually, have a level playing field. And people started to, cut corners, deal drugs. Lots of drugs were introduced into the black community, which weren't necessarily always the fault of the black community. I mean, how did tons and tons of cocaine move into those communities? So there was some shady shit done. You go into, Black Wall Street. I used to be familiar with all of this stuff, before I got, married, had a kid, and stopped kind of dying on all of these hills, guys. But I wonder what Thomas Sowell would say to that criticism, that Germany is not similarly situated, or the African Germans or whatever, they would just call them Germans. The blacks in Germany are not similarly situated. as the blacks in America. I wonder what he would say to that. If you think you know, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to read it and correspond with you.
In America today that holds African Americans themselves back?
Yes. In fact, I went into this in a previous book on which about black rednecks and white liberals, because
I love that book. If you have not read Black Rednecks and White Liberals, it is free on YouTube. Just type in Black Rednecks and White Liberals, the entire book. Audiobook version will just pop up free for you to listen to. It is fascinating.
that same subculture.
Let's talk about two of your books here. Go ahead.
Because that very same subculture held whites in the South back as well. That in the time this mental testing in the First World War turned up, among other things, the fact that whites from various 4 or 5 southern states scored lower on the mental test than blacks from 4 or 5 northern states. And so it really was a question of the subculture that was there, which was a handicap to both.
All right. And so whose job is it to say, wrong subculture, folks, you're harming yourselves?
Well, I would think in an ideal world that intellectuals might take on that task, but the world that we live in, I've noticed, is not ideal.
All right.
So I think what Thomas Sowell is suggesting here, and this is kind of another heartbreaking component of this problem, is that the intellectuals, specifically in the universities, are kind of doubling down on this harmful subculture and just saying, hey, you should be proud to be in this subculture that keeps you down and that keeps you in perpetual states of the school to prison pipeline or whatever. Maybe that's what he's suggesting. I know that Thomas Sowell is a giant critic of the education system in the U.S., guys.
What is to be done? Take a look at President Lyndon Johnson speaking at Howard University in 1965.
Oh, yes.
But freedom is not enough. You do not wipe away the scars of centuries by saying now, you are free to go where you want and do as you desire and choose the leaders you please. You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bringing up to the starting line of a race, and then say, you are free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe that you have been completely fair.
Listen, what Lyndon Johnson just said was, I think, originally offered to Abraham Lincoln post-Civil War. He was saying, look, you can't just free these people. You have to give them something. The reason people even made the journey to the United States, before the slavery, prior to the era of slavery, is because you had to be an idiot not to get completely rich, right? You were guaranteed life, liberty, and property. Before it was changed to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So this proposal was given, by Lincoln's generals to say, hey, you know what? Just give them some of the islands off of the coast of Florida. As a matter of fact, some of the free blacks went and claimed some of those islands temporarily, and Lincoln said no. And so you have the whole 40 acres and a mule. It was actually supposed to be 40 acres and a mule and $100, Yeah, it seems like Lyndon Johnson was kind of saying, look, one of the problems with these communities, I don't know what he had to say necessarily about the subculture or to what degree that subculture was alive when Lyndon Johnson was president. But he was saying, look, we need to go back and revisit that proposal that was offered to Lincoln and start giving handouts.
It's pathetic. It's not a question of, there's no you who has the control to be completely fair or completely unfair. I mean, the circumstances are, so someone once criticized the mental tests on grounds that the tests were unfair. And I think it was David Reisman who said, the tests are not unfair, life is unfair, and the tests are measuring the results. But who has control of life? Who has control of the past? Who has control of the culture that people have in the present, which they've inherited from the past?
So Lyndon Johnson...
The tests are the tests are not unfair. Life is unfair. Damn. tell me what you guys think about that in the comments.
In fact, although good liberal that he was, at least in regard, Lyndon Johnson had a complicated career and changed positions on issues many times, but good liberal though he was at that moment, he was in fact engaging in a breathtaking arrogance.
Yes.
On two counts. One, that white people were the ones who were responsible for where black people stood in the race, that it was up to whites entirely. That blacks, as he described, I'm putting this to you, the black people are passive, they're acted upon.
That's right, that's right.
And then the second act of arrogance is the supposition that somehow the federal government could fix it.
Yes, it is staggering. But if you wanted to be charitable, you could say, well, he said this in 1965. But if you say, all right, why are people now repeating it in 2013 when we've had nearly half a century of experience to the contrary? And if you look within the black community, those blacks who had escaped what I call the black redneck culture, they've moved on. So, but it's the culture the different parts of the black community had. They would.
Here's the thing, as far as the black redneck culture in the black subculture, it's very, very difficult. I say this as a black man to not to interact deeply in the black community in certain circumstances and not interact with that culture. I think I said it on another one of my pages. When my father left, my big brother got really into hip hop. He started listening to, Jay-Z, DMX, Eminem, and he started hanging out with with that music, let's say, more than me. And so I started to listen to that music in order to gain his attention. Look, I started to rap. I still rap very well on an elite level. And Thomas Sowell isn't blaming rap necessarily for problems in the black community, gangster rap in specific. But interesting stuff.
They were different.
Daniel Patrick Moynihan, in his famous 1965 report entitled "The Negro Family, the Case for National Action," close quote. Longish quotation, but it gets to something, I believe. Moynihan, the fundamental problem is that of family structure. The Negro family in the urban ghettos is crumbling. A middle class has managed to save itself, but for vast numbers of the unskilled and poorly educated, the fabric of conventional social relationships has all but disintegrated. So long as this situation persists, the cycle of poverty and disadvantage will continue to repeat itself. Close quote.
Moynihan is not the first one that I've ever heard propose this. He's not the first one I've heard. He's definitely further back than someone like Larry Elder. But Larry Elder he campaigns on this issue, that the problem is within the family structure. I, for one, you're looking at somebody who grew up for the most part without a dad. Dad left when I was 11 or 12, still stayed in our lives. I still have a good relationship with him. But just wasn't able to kind of see on a day-to-day basis that present father in the home, and to see the dynamic between a husband and wife, and so, I think there's a lot of people. I think even Barack Obama, what was it in 2009 or 2010? My years might be off there. He actually went on national television and talked about the crisis of fatherlessness in the black community.
When Moynihan wrote those words, the illegitimacy rate among African Americans was 25%. Today, the illegitimacy rate among white Americans is 36%. Among Hispanics, more than 50%, and among African Americans, more than 70%.
Yes.
Aside from throwing up your hands in despair, what is to be done?
The first thing to be done is to understand that this was a result of policies begun in the 1960s. This is not a legacy of what happened 100 years before the 1960s.
The breakdown of the black family is not a legacy of slavery.
No. If you the classic study of this goes.
The breakdown of the family is not a legacy of slavery. Listen, I've heard both sides of this. So just to fill you in, if you're not familiar with the argument, I mean, during slavery, there was, something, I guess they would call it buck breaking, which sounds awful, right? They would take the man from the woman, and they would force the woman to raise the children on her own without him. The slave master did not want the woman to see the man as a form of strength or as a form of safety or security. So a lot of times they would take the man from the woman and the children, humiliate him, beat him, just to show that woman that this black man is not a source of safety or security for you. And then she would raise the children to respect the white master more than their father, right? And I guess I thought that was an incredible argument for why the breakdown of the family structure is something that became deeply ingrained as a result of, Willie Lynch and, all of that other stuff, guys. So let's hear what Thomas Sowell has to say.
All the way back to the era of slavery. And they find that most black kids, even under slavery, had lived with two parents. And that was true all the way up until the 1960s.
So am I just wrong about that? Did I just completely make that up? Hang on 1 second. Let me ask the modern oracle here, guys. Now, let me just see, right? Now, I was under the impression that back in the slavery days, male slaves would be taken away forcefully from their wives and children and humiliated in front of their wives so that the black slave woman would then train the children to fear the white slave master more than the black man, and that this perpetuated in the cycle of the breakdown of the black family. However, what Thomas Sowell seems to be saying is that in slavery days, the majority of families remained intact. Which one of these narratives is correct, and which one of them is inflated?
I get where the confusion comes from. These are two different narratives that highlight different aspects of history and have been interpreted differently by various scholars. Historical context. Enslaved families in the U.S. faced severe disruptions due to the brutal nature of slavery. Families were often torn apart by sales, and male slaves could be separated from their wives and children. This practice, combined with the dehumanizing conditions of slavery, contributed to the breakdown of family structures. Narrative of humiliation and control. The idea that enslaved men were humiliated in front of their families is part of a broader narrative about how slave owners used psychological and physical methods to control the enslaved population.
Right.
This narrative emphasizes the psychological trauma inflicted to undermine the authority of black men within their families and communities. Thomas Sowell's perspective. Thomas Sowell, a noted economist and social theorist, has argued that many enslaved families, particularly in the U.S. South, remained intact despite the harsh conditions. He points out that the high rates of two-parent households among black families continued even after emancipation, and that the real breakdown in family structure occurred much later in the 20th century.
You know what? I think that's the better point, because Thomas Sowell is not going to disagree that families were ripped from each other during slavery. And I think a point that he actually does make in Black Rednecks and White Liberals is that after emancipation, we found black fathers. There's lots of history of black fathers walking states and states searching for their wives and children. And in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the black family was intact. And so blaming it on slavery, I guess, would leave the person who takes that method with the burden of explaining why this suddenly got better for a good 50 years before it started to disintegrate in the days of Lyndon Johnson, guys. So maybe that's it.
So if you really want to find out what's changed, it has changed since the 1960s. And the fact that whites now have a higher rate of illegitimacy than blacks had when Moynihan wrote suggests that this is something that spreads out. But if you look at something else, if you look at those blacks, look at black husband-wife families, the poverty rate among such families has been in single digits every year since 1994. And so if you look at the external causes, why the husband and wife families and the welfare single mom families all are facing the same society and objective things, but the results are radically different because the cultures and values are different.
So you would roll back welfare. I guess that's the principal policy. So what would Tom Sowell do? One, you'd eliminate welfare, you'd reform welfare. What would you do?
Roll it back.
All right. And what about affirmative action?
Eliminate.
I wonder what he means. What's the difference between rolling back welfare and eliminating it? I wonder what the distinction is.
Or what would you do?
Roll it back.
All right. And what about affirmative action?
Eliminate it.
Just gone.
Yeah.
Colorblind
Yeah.
policy completely. All right. What?
Eliminating affirmative action. I think that the conservative side of that argument is, Larry Elder just lays down, and once again, guys, I can't recommend enough that you go and watch Larry Elder's interview on The Breakfast Club, because he completely shuts it down and kind of makes himself like an uncle. It's an incredible thing to watch. But Larry Elder says that look, Martin Luther King thought that things were going so well that he actually said, guys, that within 40 years we should see a black president with how things are going. And what it turns out is that he was less than 4 years off. Like Obama came I think 44 years later. So getting rid of affirmative action entirely. I don't know. I'm not educated enough.
Prospect for that do you see?
None.
No black leader of any standing. I'm talking about a political leader as opposed to an intellectual such as yourself. You've got, there's you, there's Walter Williams. Do you get the sense that there's a growing generation, a rising generation of African American intellectuals who say, enough of this, I'm with Tom Sowell?
Well, I don't know if they'll go that far. There's no point.
That would be asking a lot.
There's no point being reckless.
I mean, you've got rising conservative black media. I think I would count Mr. L. Boyd among those ranks. Definitely Devori Dawkins. There's another guy. His name is escaping me. I would love to shout him out, but yeah, there's definitely a rising. There's Coleman Hughes. Coleman Hughes, I think, is more than media. He's a really, really smart guy. He's done some debates. So I definitely think that there's a rising generation of black intelligentsia.
But I think there are people like Shelby Steele and many others, Larry Elder. You can run through a long list.
He said Larry Elder.
More such people now than there were in the 1970s.
Yeah.
But in terms of political leaders, all the incentives politically are for black leaders to blame all problems in the black community on the larger society. And that enables them to take on the role of being the defender of the black community against enemies.
It's really fascinating, and this is my third and final time recommending Larry Elder versus The Breakfast Club. Type that in YouTube and make sure you watch that after this. But it's true. When you see Larry Elder interact with Charlemagne the God, for the first 20 minutes, Charlemagne is just saying, "Well, what do white people do wrong? What's wrong with white people?" And Larry keeps reminding him, "It's like I'm talking about the issues within our community. I'm talking about our problems." And Charlemagne just has this knee-jerk reaction to just blame this on white people and say we're not the problem. We need some kind of handout from white folks.
Which in turn creates the situation in which many blacks don't feel that anything that they do is going to help themselves unless it's done politically as a group. That there's no point. I mean, why would you, if you believe what they say, why would you want to knock yourself out in school knowing that the man is not going to let you get anywhere? One of the most pathetic things I heard in recent years was a young black man saying that, at one point he thought he would join the Air Force and become a pilot. And then he says he realized that the white man is not going to let a black man become a pilot. And he was saying this decades after the Tennessee Airmen had established their reputation in combat in Europe, you know. But the hopelessness is one of the big products of the race industry. That you have no chance. I remember giving a talk at Marquette, and at the end of the talk, among the questions that was asked, a young black man got up and he said, "Even though I am graduating from Marquette University, what hope is there for me?" And having gone through college when I was in the 50s, I don't remember any blacks saying that in the 1950s, when there was a lot more obstacles to overcome than there were when this guy is graduating from Marquette. But you have to produce that kind of feeling in order to serve the interests of those in the race industry.
To serve the interest of those in the race industry. I wish he would have unpacked, and Thomas Sowell should write a book called The Race Industry. I wish he would have unpacked what he meant by the race industry. He's talking about the race baiters, the people who really don't have an argument and just use racism or bigotry for every excuse of why they're not accomplishing things. I wonder what.
Final question then. Maybe we can think in terms of that young man at Marquette, or let's put it this way. Somewhere watching this interview, there's a young Thomas Sowell. There's an African American who's smart and wants to do something with his life. It seems to me we've already got one piece of advice you'd offer to him is stay away from the races industry. Stay away from the race hustlers. What advice would you give a young Thomas Sowell? How do you make something of yourself as an African American in America today?
The way anybody else would. You equip yourself with skills that people are willing to pay for.
Very, 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 very consistent. Thomas Sowell is extremely consistent. He didn't waver in that final answer. He's like, well, what would you say to the black person who's watching? And he's like, the same thing I would tell to the white person who's watching. it's like Thomas was like, there's not a racial difference in what my response is. Equip yourself with skills and competencies that people are willing to pay for. Period. Very, very fascinating. I think I'm going to go on maybe a Thomas Sowell train. But I'm going to go on the soul train, the real soul train, the soul train. Now, look, I'm gonna create a playlist with Thomas Sowell reactions and try to glean as many insights as possible. Follow me, comment. I will try my best to correspond.